The Yugoslav state of Croatia had its own first parliamentary elections shortly before the Monaco Grand Prix, and just as in Slovenia the ruling communists were ousted, though in Croatia it was by one party, the HDZ, Croatian Democratic Union, led by Franjo Tudjman. Amid growing ethnic tension between Croats and Serbs within the federation, and a frustration with the perceived increasing corruption of the Yugoslav government in Belgrade. The new regional government removed the word socialist from the name of the republic, started dismantling communist symbols, and began to talk about secession from Yugoslavia. And a few weeks later, a football match between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade saw tensions boil over into rioting between the two sets of fans. Into this febrile atmosphere was injected the rather incongruous glamour of the 32nd Eurovision Song Contest held in Zagreb the day before the second round of the elections. Several of the entries reflected the current political situation in Europe, either overtly, like the Austrian Keine Mauern mehr, no more walls, or the Norwegian Brandenburger Tor, or in more generic terms such as the German entry Frei zu leben, free to live, Ireland's Somewhere in Europe, or Britain's environmental plea Give a Little Love Back to the World, sung by 15-year-old Emma, just squeaking in under the minimum age barrier. The contest began badly with a technical glitch affecting Spanish entry Azúcar Moreno, whose backing track came in halfway through, but they all soldiered on, and the winner was Italy's Toto Cutugno with Insieme 1992, a paean to European integration and the upcoming adoption of the single market. It was Italy's first winner since 1964. The leaders of the Yemen Arab Republic, aka North Yemen, and People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, aka South Yemen, announced that the two countries would unify, agreeing a constitution which would be placed before the populace for ratification in a year's time. Capitalist North and Communist South Yemen had fought several times over the years, but the discovery of oil near their mutual border in the late 1980s increased diplomatic efforts to heal the rifts and allow the reserves to be exploited, and against the backdrop of lessening Soviet support for the South, the unification was agreed. Romania held its first free elections since 1937, with the president being directly elected for the first time alongside a parliamentary election. It was widely expected that interim President Ion Iliescu and his National Salvation Front would win, and they duly did, but concerns were raised over accusations of organised violence and polling irregularities, and the size of the win was unexpected, with Iliescu getting 85% of the presidential vote and the NSF winning 91 of the 119 seats in the Senate and 263 of the 396 seats in the Assembly of Deputies. Another company having its first multi-party election in decades was Burma, which had actually officially changed its name to Myanmar back in 1988, but the change hadn't really taken in the English-speaking world yet. After the uprisings in 1988, a military committee had taken control of the country and promised elections in 1990, and to many people's surprise had been as good as their word. The result was an absolute landslide for the National League of Democracy, led by reform campaigner Aung San Suu Kyi, which took 392 of the 492 seats on offer, with the military's preferred National Unity Party only getting 10. And the F1 circus arrived in the tiny principality of Monaco for the 48th time, in optimistic mood following the previous 3 races with 3 different winners. Brabham had their new rear end ready, but otherwise the cars were more or less the same as at Imola. There had been some behind-the-scenes personnel changes at Leighton House as the management was restructured to cover for Ian Phillips as he continued to be out of action with meningitis, and the team had been encouraged by great testing times at Pembrey. Over at the Monteverdi Onyx team, the factory was being packed up, ready for a move to Switzerland, which was unsettling everyone, and more of the team staff had departed. Pre-qualifying got underway on Thursday, as usual in Monaco, with the top 4 being the same as at Imola, the 2 Larousse Lolas of Bernard and Suzuki, then Guiart in the Azella and Moreno's Eurobrun, with Tarquini nearly 2 full seconds ahead of teammate Dalmas in the 2 AGSs. Giacomelli was last again, but did at least manage to get 6 or 7 laps in the Life before its engine self-destructed, and was only 2 seconds off the next slowest car. Ayrton Senna went 1.2 seconds faster than his teammate on Thursday to take provisional pole, but on Saturday Berger had problems, quote, some with the car, some with the traffic, some with me, and dropped back to 5th, with Prost using the revised Ferrari engine to go 2nd, and a lazy and amazing 3rd in his first visit to Monaco in an F1 car. Patrese, on the 13th anniversary of his first Grand Prix start, and Boutsen were 4th and 6th, bracketing the second McLaren, with Mansell back in 7th after just failing to find a clear lap. Pierluigi Martini, limping but clearly able to drive, put the Minardi 8th, with Pirro an excellent 9th ahead of Monaco-hating Piquet. Monaco first-timer Donnelly was a very respectable 11th, with veteran teammate Warwick 13th, and there were several others making their Monaco debuts: Suzuki and Bernard 15th and 24th, Wojtek 20th and JJ Leto 26th, with David Brabham making his Grand Prix debut in 25th, as the first son of a Monaco winner to start a Grand Prix in the Principality. Alboreto was just off the grid. The Arrows team seemed to be really missing Ross Brawn, with Griart unable to put in a decent time after breaking 4 drive shafts on Saturday, and Gugelmin plagued with handling problems and joining fellow Brazilian Moreno on the pit wall for the race. The weather had been changeable over the weekend, and indeed a sudden rainstorm had forced the F3 support race on Saturday to be stopped, but hadn't impacted on the F1 programme. Sunday dawned clear and cold, but no rain was expected, and the morning warm-up showed Prost fastest, while the Lotus team had to pull out all the stops to put a brand new engine in the back of Donnelly's car in half the usual time before the race. Nannini's engine died on his way out to the grid, and he had to sprint back to the pits to hop in the spare Benetton as they all lined up on Sunday afternoon, Prost hoping to equal Graham Hill's record and win in Monaco for the 5th time, and on the cleaner side of the track despite being slightly behind Senna. After what seemed like a long hold before the red light, they were away, with Senna leading Prost and Berger getting past Patrese and challenging Alesi for 3rd. Everyone got through Saint-Devote in one piece, though Capelli's Leighton House was spewing smoke as his clutch caught fire. As the leaders came up to Mirabeau, Alesi lunged past Prost to go second, but Berger, coming from a long way back, seemed to have a bit of a brain fart and tried to follow through, simply ramming the back of the Ferrari. Everyone else ground to a halt, with an unsighted Modena also arriving a bit too quick, but not quick enough to be a major problem. The race was red-flagged, good news for Capelli, who jogged back holding his seat, as well as the 3 Mirabeau casualties, with Prost saying something presumably uncomplimentary to Berger. Does anyone in the comments lip-read French? Both Prost and Berger would have to take the restart in their spare cars, which were set up for their respective teammate. Prost preferred to skip 5th gear while changing down, while Mansell's car was programmed to go through all of them, while Modena's Brabham was retrieved and had a new nose cone put on. Nelson Piquet had also been hit by Modena in the fracas, but again his car was easily patched up, and he would take his restart in the first choice car, which was just as well because Nannini was already in the spare, although the organisers did take the opportunity to retrieve his original too. So Berger, after apologising to Prost and explaining that his brakes had failed, squeezed himself into the spare McLaren. He didn't even fit in his own car properly, and everyone got ready for another go, with a full-distance 78-lap race. Pirro, another man who was too tall for his cockpit, had his car die on the grid and was pushed off to retire before the race had begun, but eventually everyone was ready for the second start. Again, Senna got away in the lead, chased by Prost and Alesi, with Berger going ahead of Patrese into 4th, and Martini getting a flyer to pass Mansell into 7th. Alesi tried to repeat his move at Mirabeau, but Prost was wise to it this time, and the Tyrrell fishtailed as Alesi braked hard to avoid impact. As they arrived at the tunnel, Senna was already starting to pull away from Prost, while Alesi was harrying the Ferrari hard, trying to get ahead where he could control the pace. Modena lasted just 3 more laps before his transmission packed up, while Senna had pulled out 4 seconds ahead of Prost, who still had Alesi and Berger right behind him, and the Williams twins keeping in touch just behind. Mansell took Martini on lap 7, as Donnelly retired with gearbox trouble, and then Pierluigi's electrics went on the fritz anyway. Nigel was on a charge now he was out from behind the Minardi, setting fastest lap and beginning to reel in the Williamses. Soon he was on Boutsen's tail as Laurini's differential went, another car out on lap 13, by which time Suzuki had also joined the casualty list, and Capelli was out with a brake problem the following lap. So another grim race for Leighton House. All the time Senna was lapping away happily in the lead, with Prost second about 10 seconds behind him, and matching Senna's lap times, with Alesi right behind him, and Berger dropping off slightly. David Brabham was next out, his debut ending with transmission failure on lap 17. Off-camera, Mansell clipped the back of Boutsen while trying to get past and had to come in for a new front wing, which put a bit of a dent in his charge as he was released back onto the track just between Prost and Alesi, and the Tyrrell quickly got past the cold-tired Ferrari just in case Nigel was thinking of helping his teammate out by holding him up. Once the Englishman's tyres were up to temperature though, he quickly set the lap record as he set out to see what he could do. Things got slightly confusing on track for a while as Prost and Alesi made their way through traffic, including Nakajima, with Mansell still in tow behind them trying to overtake the other Tyrrell, who moved over thanks to the blue flags and let Nigel through into 13th, which quickly became 12th as he followed Prost past Caffey. Unusually, Prost seemed to be catching Senna through traffic, bringing the gap down to 8.9 seconds, but on lap 31 the number 1 Ferrari peeled into the pits after his battery exploded, leaving him unable to change gear. So, Alesi moved up to second place, with Berger third, the Williamses 4th and 5th, and Piquet up into the points and bearing down on Boutsen, until he had a spin at Lowe's just like last year. The marshals pushed him back onto the track and he headed into the pits with his front right wing askew for a replacement. But since the Suzuka incident at the end of last year, the rules on push starts have been tightened and it was now an automatic disqualification even if a car was in a dangerous position, as Piquet clearly was. The team sent him back out and he was immediately black flagged, which promoted Derek Warwick into the points, with Nigel Mansell now up to 7th, 14 seconds behind and charging. So, not quite half distance and there were just 15 cars left. Barilla had a spin right in front of Berger but got it going again as Berger was starting to reel in second place to Alesi. The other Tyrrell, occupied by another Monaco hater, Nakajima, clouted a wall and toured in to retire from 10th. By lap 40, Senna's lead was over 22 seconds, with Berger just 4 seconds behind Alesi and closing fast, looking to make it a McLaren 1-2, with Patrese another 20 seconds behind Berger and Boutsen 20 seconds behind him and the last man on the lead lap. Warwick, meanwhile, was being caught by Mansell to the tune of 4 seconds a lap, while Alesi had responded to Berger's charge and sped up again, so apart from the imminent scrap over 6th, things had stabilised for the time being. Patrese came in on lap 41 and after some frantic work by the Renault technicians he was out with a derangement of his valve gear, so Warwick was up to 5th and Mansell 6th, and the two were now together and preparing to lap Leto, who got smartly out of the way as the two veteran Brits came through. Warwick put up a valiant defence, but Mansell took the place going into the swimming pool. Senna lapped 4th placed Boutsen as Patrick Head debriefed Patrese, as Berger continued chipping away at the gap to Alesi a little at a time. With 18 laps to go, the number 28 McLaren was right on the Tyrrell's gearbox, but as has so often been the case, catching is one thing and passing is quite another, and Alesi wasn't making it easy for Berger to pass. Meanwhile, Mansell had charged right back up to Boutsen again, ready to have another go and hopefully not crash into him this time. The pair shot past another retirement, JJ Leto, whose gearbox gave out on the same lap as Barilla's, leaving 9 cars still running: Senna, Alesi, Berger, Boutsen, Mansell, Warwick, Caffey, Foytek and Bernard. Mansell passed Boutsen after following him for a lap, just as Alesi and Berger hove into view to lap them both. They passed Boutsen easily enough, but Mansell was still going quicker and stayed ahead of the Tyrrell, while Senna was still going quicker and quicker in turn, trading fastest laps with Mansell and breaking the lap record just to keep himself entertained in between lapping the ever more sparse back markers, putting a second lap on Caffey's arrows on lap 61. A few laps later, and Nigel Mansell was touring, his gung-ho drive brought to an end by the exact same exploding battery problem that had seen to Prost, so just one finish in his first 4 races of 1990, fueling rumours that were already circulating that this might be his last year with Ferrari. Derek Warwick was promoted to 5th but had no time to enjoy it before he spun into a wall on the exit to the swimming pool and nearly collected Senna while trying to get it turned back round before giving up, and his Lotus was rapidly craned off the track. For his part, Senna had eased off as he got into the last few laps and started losing 2 seconds a lap to Alesi, who was still keeping Berger safely behind him. The retirements of Mansell and Warwick had put Caffey up into 5th and Foytek into 6th, and scrapping over the last point with Bernard, who was the last man running. The TV director couldn't quite decide where to look as there were 2 terrific battles on track: Berger and Alesi over 2nd place and Foytek and Bernard over 6th. While the cameras were watching the former for a while, Bernard nudged the Monteverde Onyx into the barriers with a couple of laps to go as Senna began his last lap with Alesi and Berger now bearing down on him. Had he slowed too much? Alesi certainly had his foot firmly to the floor as Senna toured round the last lap, but Ayrton knew what he was doing and crossed the line to take the win with Alesi and Berger close behind, the top 3 covered by a shade over 2 seconds. Boutsen took 4th, lapped and a full minute and a half behind Berger. Caffey was 5th and Bernard 6th. Gregor Wojtek had completed 90% distance, so he was classified 7th, which was his first official result in Formula 1. So the three musketeers made their way up to the royal box, Senna victorious for the third time in 4 years here, now firmly in the championship lead, as Prost dropped to 4th after his retirement, with Berger and Alesi moving ahead into 2nd and 3rd places respectively. Arrows and Caffey would be delighted with his 2 points, as would Gerard Larousse, with Bernard's first career point potentially vital in lifting the team out of pre-qualifying come the midpoint of the season. And so to Canada in 2 weeks' time as the Grand Prix circus went on its 2-race North American summer tour with races at Montreal and Mexico City.